Gerard Ahern,
Present.
and Gabrielle Lamano.
Present.
Okay, so we have probably another full night of hearings here. So let's start with where we left off at the last hearing. Is we had two technical review aspects that we were hoping to get organized by tonight's meeting. The first was our engineering peer review. For those on the Zoom meeting that weren't able to meet last time, we had 4 candidates for engineering technical peer review, and we selected Horsley Witten Group. They'll do the engineering peer review. They're paid through funding by the applicant, and the Horsley Witten Group's proposal was $9,400, much less than the other 3 potential participants. One didn't have time, one didn't think they had the technical resources, and one was clearly higher. At the last hearing, the board voted to accept the Horsley Witten review contingent upon seeking some additional information from them to see if they could incorporate into their proposal a traffic review peer review study team. And so they were able to solicit from a pretty well-known traffic review team called Vanessa and Associates Inc. And they submitted a proposal through Horsley Witten for an amount of $6,000. And so we accepted that proposal to do the work. So the combined anticipated technical review and the peer review at the current moment is about $15,400, which was still less than the $26,000 proposal by Haley Ward. So both of those resources, I believe, have been given the proposal, the peer review, the applicant's plans and comments from the abutters and from the boards, and they're actively reviewing the plans. Is that your understanding as well, Valerie?
Yes, that's right. Yes. So the Horsley Witten typically looks to have 21 days notice ahead of a public hearing. And so they should be prepared if we do continue to January. So I would expect a peer review letter by ahead of the next meeting.
Right. That's right. Anticipated as well. So that's good. And then
very glad that we moved forward, Mr. Chairman, with the traffic element of that, because it is such an important, and the traffic element was also brought up by the Public Ways Safety Committee and from several correspondence from citizens. So I'm glad we're doing it that way.
I am too, because it's it's not lost on anyone. I think it's sometimes people just talk about the density issue as being the big issue, but really the infrastructure on the project and the impact on that main street, which can be quite a bottleneck in current traffic conditions. And so it really has to be vetted. Any other comment on the with regard to this peer review resource? Otherwise, I'd like to introduce the second peer review aspect that we have afforded to the board, is the resource that gets paid through via grant from the Mass Housing Partnership. And we filed the application for a grant because this is a unique project. It's the first project of this size, apartment based and whatnot. And it's a large project per DHCD's regulations. And we were luckily afforded a grant to use Joe Pesnola. The board's very familiar with Joe. He was from Hancock and Associates. He's helped us on other 40Bs on a much smaller level. projects, but Joe has great technical assistance. So I wanted to introduce Joe. He's online here. And Joe Pesnola has also already prepared an initial letter to the board with his observations and findings on the applicant's proposal and plans. So let's give Joe, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So if he needs that to give an introduction and then maybe highlight the key components of his initial letter.
Hello. Yeah, just one quick comment. Couple of letters were filed with the board over the last week requesting an impact statement on the town, a financial impact statement for the infrastructure. I think that one, I just don't want that to slide through the cracks. I don't know whether Joe has any comment on that, but they've asked for a waiver of any kind of local impact statement, and that I don't like. I want to know what it's going to cost us tax wise. I mean, I read in last week's paper that the assessment rate of the town has gone up to 7.9%. So it's like an 8% increase in our assessments, and they've dropped the tax rate by $1. But the net result is going to be a $323 increase to each home. Each home will be paying an average of $11,799. So with this project paying $3,000 a unit, I think that's a real issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, Joe Pesnola from Handicap Associates, your MHP consultant on this project. I can just quickly jump right to Mr. Reed's comment or question with regard to fiscal impact. A normal fiscal impact analysis is done on a project, a large project before a planning board, usually in the context of issuance of a special permit. That fiscal impact analysis is wide ranging. It looks at, all the municipal impacts that a project might have. And it is allowed through that planning board special permit process because of the nature of the special permit that a planning board is given the authority to grant, and the wide discretion that a planning board has in consideration of a special permit. And I just want to qualify that before I then contrast it to the process that we are in here, which is a comprehensive permit. The board in this case does not have the same wide-ranging discretionary powers that a planning board has under special permit. Your basic premise here is that the need for affordable housing outweighs local concerns, and that is the presumption that the applicant is entitled to. And it's not until the an issue rises above the level of egregiousness as far as impact, at which that balance may be tipped the other way. So I would just caution the board in just looking for a standard fiscal impact analysis because of the limitations as far as what you can use that for. What I would look to do is look more closely at the issues that you've raised to date. One of which is the traffic and the impact to Main Street, which is your main thoroughfare and congested many times, especially in the peak morning and afternoon. And look at those issues and look to see if those issues spur infrastructure improvements that are needed that are related to the project. I just don't want the board to go down and start to get into places through requesting a fiscal impact analysis that you just can't go based on the regulations and based on the Housing Appeals Committee case laws. I mean, just case in point, you are not allowed to talk about school impact, even though
one question.
there will be children at this project.
Well, my point is, does the town have a right to know what it's going to be? I'm not saying it's going to impact our ability to change the project, but doesn't the taxpayer have a right to know what the fiscal impact is going to be, or is this a big mystery that hits us in the face?
Yeah, I hear you, and I appreciate that, and all with regards to what the applicant is required to give you and to submit. They have satisfied that by and large, and my letter outlines that. Certainly, if the applicant is willing to work with the board under the provisions that, you know, it's not going to turn into conditions that make the project uneconomic, or look for it to be fodder for a denial or an overly heavy-handed condition of approval, then maybe the applicant would be willing to help the board understand what those impacts are for the purposes of the town to plan for those impacts. Certainly, I think we can get into discussions with the applicant in kind of a negotiation to see if they would be willing to assist in answering those questions of fiscal impact, that number of children that might reside in the project, and number of emergency vehicle calls or police calls that might be anticipated of a project of this size. Information like that could be then disseminated to the departments for their planning purposes. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood the context and the difference between what a planning board might do under special permit proceeding, and what where your charge lies and where your limitations are.
So an impact of a 10% increase in the population really is nothing we can worry about. So I guess that's what I'm being told here.
Yes, essentially what the state in their infinite wisdom is saying is that you're not pulling your fair share weight because you don't have 10% affordable housing on your rolls, and therefore you're subject to reviewing projects such as this, and you need to proceed under the presumption that the need for affordable housing outweighs the local concerns, and the local concern would be the impact of that increase in population.
Brad, I would say also, just to add to that it's not that we can't worry about the impact of potential 10% increase in the town population or resource in the town, but it'll be incumbent upon us to, as Joe acknowledged, negotiate with the applicant on the best potential outcome of the project, so that in crafting a decision at some point and working with the applicant, that if everything is supposed to work as planned, and we accommodate whatever conditions we can, then we'll do our best to, quote, worry about the impact on the town, without trying to pin them down to specific analyses that, as Joe indicated, they're outside our purview to obtain. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is a fair summary.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as my letter, December 1st, it's just an initial review of the application. I did find the application to be very thorough and complete and voluminous, containing more than is required, but knowing the size of the project, I think they were smart to make sure that they covered their bases in providing traffic studies and full stormwater reports and information on that might go, the plans and documentation that are well beyond preliminary because of the size of the project and the need for a good and thorough review by the board and your technical peer reviewers. But just hitting the high points, the minimum requirements, the applicant does have site control through a purchase and sale agreement. There are 5 amendments to that purchase and sale agreement, and I did try to review it, and I, for the life of me, could not find the expiration date of the 5th amendment. Just want to put that out to the applicant just to make sure that I'm sure it's important to them to make sure that they have a valid purchase and sale agreement moving forward that will last through the process itself. The applicant did receive a site eligibility letter from Mass DHCD. This is a local initiative program. The difference between a standard 40B and a LIP is they received the endorsement of the selectmen prior to making application to DHCD. Understand that is not, the selectman has no authority here for the purposes of the comprehensive permit, but in a local initiative program project, the developer goes in to the selectmen to pitch the idea. And it's somewhat of a partnership between the select board and the applicant in that their endorsement allows them to go to DHCD instead of Mass Housing under the LIP program, and it's seen to be somewhat, it seemed to be a friendly 40B, a 40B that has a comprehensive permit that has the backing of the select board again. So that is in place and valid, and there doesn't seem to be any changes to the plan since that was submitted. And last, the applicant is a limited dividend organization. The applicant is WP East Acquisitions, or a limited dividend entity related to WP East, and that LLC is in good standing with the Secretary of State's office, and we see no issues there. It would be important that they note that that it will be a limited dividend or organization related to WP East, and if so, there needs to be that entity created, and then there'll have to be some transfer of the rights in the comprehensive permit at that point. So as the applicant moves down that road, they should share with the board what that entity will be and what the details of the transfer of the permit from WP East to that entity.
So if they have, the applicant, I believe, also one of the entities is Wood Partners, I think. So
yeah, Wood.
So one question that was raised to the board through an email was, if conditions or commitments are being made by the limited dividend, or if it's being spoken on behalf of Wood Partners, are they all sort of bound by the same commitments throughout this the hearing?
They are. I mean, WP East is an entity related to Wood Partners. I'm sure the WP of WP East Acquisitions is Wood Partners. So looking at the people involved, Mr. Lambert is the face of WP East for this proceedings. He is one of the 3 managers of WP East Acquisitions, along with Elizabeth Day and Richard Dickerson. So yeah, there's a relation there, and they're bound by all of that. What normally happens in these projects, if WP East Acquisitions is an entity of Wood Partners that purchases properties, and has properties, ownership of properties. In a comprehensive permit, you really need a single entity. Now, that single entity is created for the purposes of tracking the limited dividend, so that the monies going in and out of that organization are open and transparent and subject to the audit at the end of the project, or in this case, it's a rental project. So continual audits on an annual basis to make sure that they are abiding by the limited dividend requirements. And that will probably also be an LLC. That LLC doesn't become a limited dividend organization. There's really no legal entity known as a limited dividend organization. That LLC's signing the regulatory agreement. And in the case of the LIP, the regulatory agreement will be signed by three parties: the applicant, DHCD, and the town. In the case of a normal 40B, it's only between the subsidizing agency and the applicant. The town's not a party to the regulatory agreement. So here the town is a party to the regulatory agreement, and that regulatory agreement binds that entity to the limited dividend, the provisions for finding applicants who meet the criteria for affordable, how those units are administered, how those units are replaced if somebody moves out, and all of the details thereof. So upon execution of that, that's when they really become an LDO. So they've committed to that, obviously, through the application process, and will not be able to move forward on the project until they get that regulatory agreement endorsed by the two other parties. So the initial review of the submission materials, they needed to provide preliminary plans, and they've done that. As I've said, they're very well detailed beyond preliminary. Existing conditions survey and condition report, they've done that. Preliminary scaled architectural plans, they've done that. Market Square Architects have submitted a fairly comprehensive set of architectural plans. They're supposed to provide a tabulation of proposed buildings, type, sizes, footprints, impervious coverage, and open space, including percentage of the track. I didn't see that. I might have missed it. There's a lot of information, but if the applicant can just follow up on that and make sure that that table is someplace within either the plan set or the information. And that's just a right out of the regulations requirement to have that kind of tabular summary someplace. They're required to do a preliminary subdivision plan if they are providing, or if they're proposing a subdivision, and in this case they are subdividing the property into two lots, one of which will be the comprehensive permit lot, and the other will be the remaining piece to be held by the current owner of the office park. And there's some issues there that that I have highlighted, and that just has to do with the applicant demonstrating that the remainder lot is compliant. That remainder lot, which is shown as lot 1, which is 6.65 acres, is not allowed to ask for any relief from this board. That has to be a fully compliant lot, and where it is a developed lot, and a developed lot that is that will need modification. They are going to tear down a piece of the building. They are going to reconfigure the parking lot. They are feigning that that lot will be left compliant. The applicant's approach to this is that is the responsibility of the current owner. But I think regardless, this board is being asked to endorse the subdivision, And again, you don't have the authority to grant any relief to that lot. So I think it behooves you to ask for and receive from the applicant some kind of information with regards to that lot one. That yes, it is going to be left compliant by taking this portion of the building down, and this is the reconfiguration of the parking lot. These are the required number of parking spaces that are for the remainder of the building, and this is how they're going to do it. Now, the approval of that modification to that existing site is in the jurisdiction of the planning board or the select board, whoever has jurisdiction over that. There is a 1986 select board special permit that was issued to the project. That also I have some questions on that I'll go into in a second. But still, again, from the standpoint of zoning compliance, and if you're being asked to ultimately endorse an A&R subdivision plan in the stead of the planning board for the comprehensive permit, then your board should know that everything is right and ready with that. Preliminary utilities plans, that is there within the materials, and a list of waivers. And they have provided a list of waivers, but they are asking for some blanket waivers and looking for waivers from local bylaws in entirety. An example of which is the local wetlands bylaw. And I've always recommended to the board that they try not to grant blanket waivers and to get as much specificity as possible with regards to the waivers that are being asked for, with regards to the relief that's being sought. So I would look to that. And the last issue on the waivers is the applicant is asking for the board, for your board, to extinguish the conditions of the original 1986 special permit granted by the Bolton Select Board as it pertains to the portion of the proposed subdivided lot for the comprehensive permit. And I think you need to seek input from council on this one. I don't know that you have jurisdiction to effect a decision that was granted in 1986 by the select board. It may be that the select board needs to modify that decision in the context of review of the modified office building, and then decide whether they'll relieve the comprehensive permit lot of those requirements. Now, some of these conditions have to do with use of the parking lot for the Bolton Fair, and the Bolton Fair hasn't been in these backlands for how many years now? Whatever, 6, 7, 8 years. It's been down in Lancaster at the fairgrounds there. So I don't know that that's important to the select board, but again, it's just a jurisdictional question. I guess the applicant could argue that, what if they don't get the relief of the comprehensive permit portion of the lot, which really can't be withheld if it makes or breaks the project. So I guess there needs to be discussion there, and I think seeking counsel would help.
Does that apply to the wetlands as well? I mean, you're saying if it's going to interfere with the project, it doesn't matter anyway. So is this just a wasting exercise?
Right. It's more of just vetting the process and understanding the impacts to allow you to potentially condition or ask for modification to the plan if you believe that the impacts under the local wetlands bylaw are, again, rising to that point of an egregious level that you think that the presumption is tipped. with regards to those issues. But I think just asking for a blanket waiver with no specificity is just not affording the board the information that you're entitled to stand in the shoes of the Conservation Commission in review of the project and potential impacts. And it could be as little as, you know, formulating conditions that are sensitive to that when you get to that point. So that brings me to the next point on comments from municipal boards and commissions and town staff. It'll be critical to get conservation input, you know, on these matters, as well as all the other boards and departments in town as we move forward. I think important to that is the relationship between this project and the remainder project. There is some shared access shown at the back of the office building that comes from the parking lot of this project. So just understanding that a little bit better and being able to make sure that the fire department and the police department understand that with regards to what they are left with for access to that commercial building. And if it is coming through this project, that they review that access as part of this project. Because again, if they need modifications to that, then it affects this project, even though it's access to project you don't have jurisdiction. So again, I think understanding what that other project is, even in concept, knowing that you don't have jurisdiction to it and how that interacts with the project you do have jurisdiction over is important. So then I've provided some, and I know this is the third meeting, but just some general outlines for meetings moving forward.
So this is the second meeting. So we've had one site walk as well, which we'll talk about. But ultimately, you know, we're not that far along to you know, bring you in.
Yeah. So you open the hearing on November 8th. The 180 days would bring us to May 7th, which is a Saturday. So I think the board should consider Friday, May 6th as the end of the 180 days.
Mm-hmm. 2022. Okay. And as we discussed in the initial hearing, we're generally on a cycle of like one meeting a month, because depending on what technical review and things that happen, you know, they need time to review information, review plans, and then, you know, respond. And then likewise, the applicant needs time to respond to things that have been provided and, you know, questions. So we're on that cycle of generally about one meeting a month. And as we get closer to the hearing close, you know, if we have to schedule work sessions and things like that, those can be accommodated to the extent the board has availability and things like that. But I know from the past, you'll help us out with that timing and keep us on schedule.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Gerard, what the issue that was brought up about this 1986 special permit
Mm-hmm.
is something that we should get the developer to address sooner rather than later. Try to identify the specific items that they want to have extinguished or waived or whatever, because we're going to have to then use those criteria and go back with maybe some other town boards or commissions, you know, to discuss what they're asking for. So the sooner we can have those things ironed out, the better.
I concur. Yeah. And I don't know if Valerie has any information, you know, relative to those permits from 1986, but if she can, you know, start querying the Board of Selectmen if they're the ones that granted it, you know, at least grease the pipeline that we're going to be coming to them so they get some information and potentially that'd be good.
Yeah, exactly. And I can talk to the applicant too, just about what that would mean to modify that special permit. I've seen in other 40B processes that, you can condition the permit, as Joe was saying, on the successful modification of that special permit. So essentially directing the applicant to the Board of Selectmen for that phase.
Okay. And if we have to have, if you'll let us know if there's any recommendation to have town council review any of the information.
Of course, yes.
Thanks.
In addition to what Andy said, I also think we need to, go back and ask for details on the conservation waivers. So
Okay.
it's not a blanketed waiver. That's something we're going to want to get in front of the Conservation Commission.
Correct. And, the conservation, we will talk a little bit about what we've received so far from either the abutters or town participants, but the boards, Board of Health, Conservation, Parks and Recs, Police, and Public Way Safety Committee, they've all, provided some initial commentary, and certainly the Conservation Commission has already, spoken to or documented to the fact that they'll need ANRADs, NOIs, additional analyses, wildlife impacts, trail development reviews, nature-based solutions throughout the project. So we'll get all this information. We'll review their information, but also there'll be a lot of dialogue, I'm sure, between our board and the applicant and the conservation as well as other boards.
Mr. Chairman, this is Debbie Horwitz representing the applicant. Is it okay if I respond on the special permit Board of Selectmen issue?
Sure, if you're up to the say, sure.
So I just we did ask for some specific waivers. We can go back and clarify as people think appropriate. One thing I just wanted to respond to in terms of the legal perspective of asking for those waivers, that's actually classic 40B. It's asking the zoning board to stand in place of the Board of Selectmen in this case, but it's the Board of Selectmen acting in its local capacity. So I'm happy to work with your town council to discuss that further, but we are requesting that the zoning board stand in the shoes of the Board of Selectmen for that purpose. And we think that's appropriate under 40B. And we do not, this is different from a condition that might say we have to go to the Conservation Commission for an order of conditions under the Wetlands Protection Act, which is a state act that we acknowledge we do have to go to the Conservation Commission about, but we would not expect to go to the select board separately for the waiver of the prior conditions.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, my only point was that special permit needs to continue to exist for non-40B project.
Absolutely.
So it's just that nuance, and I'm not pretending to be a lawyer, and Debbie is, so that's why I suggested that she work with council on exactly what that looks like.
Right. Happy to.
Yeah. And to be sure, you weren't saying Debbie is pretending to be a lawyer. Debbie is a lawyer.
Whatever.
I'm not.
No,
I'm
I've
not
been called
pretending.
worse things than a lawyer. So okay.
no, don't minimize your accomplishments. So, all right. So, Joe, are you wrapped up on at least your preliminary like introductions and analysis of their the application?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Does anyone on the board have any other comments for Joe before we move on to the next item? All right, so not hearing anything. We did have a site walk. I just wanted to document that. We had a site walk on December 1st from 8 to 9 p.m. That was hosted by the applicant and the applicant's technical team and was also accompanied by the current property management owner's representative. And it was well coordinated walk. Property lines were staked out, proposed parking, was flagged or marked, in building corners were identified. We walked out to the Zone 1 well area, which led us into some of the discussions of the areas that will be impacted, whether it be the fields or the community gardens, the gravel road. I mean, so we got a good thorough review of the current site as it exists, and then what's envisioned for the different buildings, where they're located, and some of the items that have either been highlighted to us from the earlier meeting or from the comments we've seen in town residents or butters comments, but certainly came clear. The traffic flow will be important, the well sightings, and then what restrictions those are going to require based on, current usage of the property versus future use of the property. And traffic was discussed. So it just, for me, it solidified that, it's not an insignificant project. It's going to have a lot of impacts, and we have to do a good job to make sure we do the best job vetting the potential impact to the town, while understanding we have to, consider, as the overriding point is that it's an affordable housing proposal. So we have to give weight to that need for the town. Anyone else have any comments about the sidewalk, or do they have any questions or requests for information that we may have not asked about at that site? Usually we don't do deliberations at those at sidewalks. So you may have had things to think about since the sidewalk that you want to bring up at the board. Now would be the time. Everyone good from the board perspective on that? Hearing nothing, unless people are muted and want to say something. We'll go
Yeah,
to
no,
the
I'm good. Thanks.
So thanks, Brian. Yeah. So the next item, we said at the last hearing, because of the thoroughness of the applicant's proposal and the presentation, we didn't have a ton of time, or any time really, to review some of the either letters, emails, or potential comments that the abutters or the audience participants wanted. So let's take about 30 minutes if it takes that long, but certainly we don't have to use the whole 30 minutes. But I know just looking through the application site that Valerie's tracking for the board, we had at least 7 different town residents submit some inquiries or some comments to the zoning board. And I'm sure Valerie's getting those comments, letters to the applicant, but we heard from and I'll just say that the initials for the first name, because I didn't jot them down in my notes here, but we have an A. Jadonic, L. Cedrone, Ed Sterling. I say Ed because I know Ed. P. Bentsetter, J. Missouri, and T. Barton, and B. Boyle. So if any of those people are present and would like to, I address their either comment or concern, just know that we have, if all 7 people are here, we have to keep the comments crisp and the questions, any questions, address them to the board, and we will make sure that then on behalf of you, through the board, we'll make them available to the applicant. So,
On the sidewalk, I had a question about
sure.
the fire rating of the building. Is it going to be sprinkled NFPA 13, or is it going to be NMP a 13R? Can someone answer that question?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, oh, yes, Jim.
I believe Adam Wagner or Rob Harbison from Market Square, who were both on with us tonight, one of the two, if you guys don't mind jumping in on that question, that would be great.
Yeah, it looks like. I can jump in on that. And Mr. Reed, I apologize. You had asked me that question on site, and I should have a better answer for you. My belief is that we're going to have to go with a 13 system, and that we're not going to be allowed to do a 13R.
Who makes that determination?
Once we go through and do a comprehensive code review on each of the buildings, which we will do, we will finalize what the code requirement is going to be. But I believe we're going to have to do a 13 system for these buildings based on their size.
So, and for Brad, obviously Brad knows what he's talking about there. For my benefit or anyone else, what's the distinguishing between a 13 and a 13R?
The R stands for residential. It's just a slightly lighter sprinkler system, if you will. So, for example, spaces like closets may not be required to be sprinkled in a 13R system, where they be required in a full 13 system.
It's also areas like attics, a lot of the, and there was a recent fire in Wakefield, and I assume that was your building. So I just wondered where that was and, whether that was a 13 or 13R.
Yeah, so I don't know. I was not involved in that project. I don't know if Jim can speak to it, but we're going to go through and do a comprehensive code review before construction starts. We'll be meeting with your fire department. We'll be meeting with your building inspection department, to make sure that everything's being done in compliance with the current codes, and just to run through the building as a whole. How would your fire department approach that building should there be a fire event? All of these things are part of the process that we'll be going through as we complete construction drawings.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Tulipani. I'm the design manager at Wood Partners. I just want to reinstate what Adam said. We do NFPA 13 on all of our buildings in Massachusetts. It is the more robust system that includes things like closets, intermittent spaces, and attics. So we will get the higher coverage from the 13 system.
Yeah, well, this, as you know, this town is a volunteer fire department, so we're not going to be able to provide the coverage you might get in a city. So I just want that to be a factor in your thinking.
No, we understand that.
All right. So if that's the last comment on the sidewalk, then let's turn it over to about our town participants on the hearing, if they would like to go through questions or comments. So in sort of the order that I saw them in the either the first hearing notes or this most recent hearing information for the board, is there an age Jagodnik online that would like to speak?
Yes, I'm here.
And
Tony Jagodnik, East End Road.
Perfect, thanks.
My main concerns are regarding energy efficiency and emissions.
Okay.
So I've been trying to correspond with the applicant regarding possible use of ground source heat pumps to improve the energy efficiency. First, I want to say that in Massachusetts, there's a 2050 decarbonization plan roadmap, and it seeks to put heat pumps. It's one of the critical system transformations in order to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. And they plan to install heat pumps in about 1 million homes by 2030. So I think heat pumps are a great way to save energy, reduce emissions, and I'd like to see them considered for inclusion in this project to save money for the owners, the renters, and the town, and to improve the quality of the planet. So I been trying to correspond with the applicant. I sent a few emails. I sent 7 links to multifamily projects which have used ground source heat pumps. And I think maybe some of these things are a little too early now, but I think in particular, the ground source, it requires boring into the ground, putting ground loops into the ground. And normally, if that can be coordinated with the other construction activities, it's not nearly as disruptive as if you have to tear apart things that you've already done in order to install them. So I'd like to see that considered. I had some more specific questions, but I don't want to get into those right now. But I'd like to at least get some response from the applicant to what I've already sent.
So at least for purposes of the board, like we want to at least make sure that we're getting the information. If you're sending things directly to the applicant, I would request that you make sure you send them to Valerie or Tyson.
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay, just be sure, just for my, just so you localize, I want to be sure that there's not a separate dialogue channel going directly to the applicant, because then we don't know what's being asked. We can't, step in and try to solicit on your behalf or in the board. So let's keep all the communications through the board, through Valerie, and then we'll be sure that they get them. And then as part of the process, yes, they'll be reviewing and trying to respond as professionally as they can to the requests that are coming in from either butters or residents or the boards that as they solicit comments and questions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's go through the other questions rather than have a one-off response, because then the applicant maybe can maybe they had some items that they already respond, but it may be more efficient to have them address at the very end after we get through these comments, responses to the individuals that speak. Is there an El Cedrone? No. Is there an Ed Sterling online? No. Okay. Pat Benselter. So what, if they're not online, I'll just note that Pat is looks like an abutter, and she submitted a inquiry through the board or indicating her concern that the water usage on the project and the potential impact on her well. Ed Sterling, I think as a resident spoke, but he's also part of the board for the Parks and Recreations. His letter was seeking information from through us from the applicant because he's trying to develop some estimates for recreational impacts that this project will have. So he's looking for some information. Is there a and then the El Cedrone, it looks like he's a member of the Parks and Recreation Board, and he's indicated that he doesn't believe that the comments that Ed Sterling submitted as part of the Parks and Recreation Board had actually been voted as their comments, so he was in agreement with Ed's initial letter. Is there a Jay Missouri online? If not, Jay Missouri's letter, they had questions about access to the fields and the community garden concerns, which we did discuss at the site walk, or observed at the site walk. Again, we didn't hold any board discussions, but the issues that come up with that zone 1 area and access fields is that at some point the area will be restricted, because while people may have been accessing the property in the past through cars or whatnot, the requirements for the zone 1 limit any type of vehicle access to that property or that specific area. So that's going to probably have some workaround for access to fields that we'll have to work out with the applicant, because strict sort of limitations on what can be done on the zone 1 area will have to be followed by the town and by its residents. At least that's our initial observation. And then. Hello?
Sorry, Gerard, I might just add to that, just to clarify that the access over the well radius as it is now, regardless of whether the project moves forward, should be restricted. So essentially, the town has learned more about the location of wells, and the way the land is now, there should not be cars going over that area. So I want to make sure that residents are understanding that it is not this development that may be standing in the way of something. So
right. No, good point, Valerie.
Thank you.
Yep. So the next resident that there was a letter from or email from communication was a T. Barton. I think I see Ted online. Hello, Ted. So if you'd like to speak to your increase to the board, or certainly go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name is Ted Barton. My wife and I live on Bowen Hill Road in Bolton. We've lived in town since 1996. Bolton's a great place to live, very nice town. I guess just to start, I think the site that Wood Partners has selected for this project is a good one for a whole bunch of obvious reasons. I think if Bolton is going to host a project of some scale of this nature, this is a good place to do it. That said, I have three specific items based on my initial read of most of the application. I have to admit, I did not plow through all 800 or 900 pages of it, but I think I got the gist of it. So I have three items that I spoke to in my initial email that I think are candidates for discussion and negotiation between the ZBA and the applicant that I would like to strongly encourage the ZBA to pursue. And the first is an agreement to have an elevator in each of the buildings. My understanding of what is on the table now is an elevator in only one of the four large buildings. And I think for an apartment project that is aimed at a wide range of residents, but I've seen mentioned in a couple places that one of the target audiences would be older folks in Bolton that are looking to step down from a large single-family house to something a little more compact and manageable. I think not having elevators in 3-story buildings is a real turnoff, not to mention the obvious access issues for the physically challenged and people that may find themselves with a temporary health challenge. So having just turned 70 myself, the idea of lugging groceries up to the 3rd floor would be pretty unappealing if I were to consider an apartment. So I hope that for a variety of good reasons that the applicant will revisit that issue and plan to have a passenger elevator in each of the 4 large buildings. And my second concern is with traffic and access to the site, and in particular, the driveway on to 117. So having spent 25 years sitting in that traffic going to and from my office in Maynard, I consider myself somewhat of an expert on 117 congestion. I'm kidding, but it's a good location for access in 3 of the 4 turning. But people leaving the site, making a left-hand turn to head head west on 117. That is a very challenging maneuver. So I realized the board's going to have a traffic study done. The applicant has already submitted a traffic study, but I think this is something that really requires a hard look. It may or may not warrant a traffic light that could be synchronized with the 2 lights we already have at the 495 ramps. But barring that, another form of traffic control would be basically to prohibit left-hand turns across traffic during the busy morning and evening hours. So I know the board intends to take a close look at that, and I would really encourage that we do a careful job studying that. And if some traffic control is warranted, that you work with the applicant to come up with something that doesn't make 117 any worse than it already is. So my third kind of specific comment that I'd like to see the board work on concerns the provision of rooftop solar. And I know a couple other commenters had submitted some comments on this, and as I understand where it stood at least a month ago, was that the developer had said they would consider rooftop solar. And I would, for a complex of this scale and one that is going to be pretty much open to good sunlight in every direction, I would really like to see that condition move from would consider to we actually do it. And the previous speaker spoke about some of the reasons for that, but this is going to be an all electric complex. It's going to use a lot of electricity. My last electric bill from Natural Grid was for 27 cents a kilowatt hour. So I think at that kind of price, even if the commercial rate is a little better, I certainly think that rooftop solar could be made to work and work economically for a project of this scale. And I think it just kind of sends a bad signal to be building something of this magnitude only 9 years from the state's 2030 goal of a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and not to install rooftop solar. And I think that could be taken further as well, to consider ground-mounted solar on other parts of the site. But at a minimum, I'd like to see the board go pretty hard after the rooftop solar issue. So those were 3 sort of specific things that jumped out at me when I read the application, or at least most of the application. But I think my broader concern is one of scale and the impact on town finances. And I certainly respect what Mr. Pesnola said in his review, but I don't think the town is as powerless as one might take from that discussion. This is a project that could potentially add 10% to the town's population. It will take us not only to our 10% threshold, but well beyond that. So a project half the scale of what is proposed would get us to where we need to be on the affordable housing front, doing our fair share, and in a much better position, I think, to work with projects of this magnitude. And I don't know if he's on the call or not, but I did see in the board package that a neighbor of mine, Brian Boyle, submitted an interesting comment letter on basically one of the waiver provisions, and it has to do with an enumeration of the impacts on town services, education, fire, public safety, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So I sure as hell hope that the board will insist on a full rendering of that subject before granting any waiver. And I won't belabor the point, but my basic concern is that this is a very large project. the $700,000 a year that the project has proposed to pay in real estate taxes is, by my math, barely half of what they would pay on a full assessed value basis. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And I don't think we are in any way shirking our responsibility toward public housing by insisting that there be a robust discussion on that subject. So I think you get my point, and I've probably gone on long enough. I appreciate the listen, and I look forward to continuing to participate in the dialogue. So thank you.
Ted, thank you for your comments. I would agree with you on the impact statement, but we're being told we're not entitled to one. So I don't know how we go from this point. We're supposed to waive that automatically according to the state, and I'm not very happy about it. I'm not comfortable with that, but that's a suggestion, is we basically just take one for the team. So
Well, we work with the applicant to get whatever information is reasonably possible, or that they can, help us to get a better understanding of, how we ultimately either accept or condition the project to incorporate as many of these concerns that we feel that we're then minimizing some impact without, making their project uneconomic to them. So, and that's where we're going to rely on some of our technical reviewers like Joe, and we're going to, if we need council review and things like that, we're going to, we're going to have to just make sure we're doing our due diligence to ensure that what we can get access to respond to our inquiries and our concerns. If it's within the process that we can get it, we'll get it, and then we'll.
I would make a horrible suggestion, which people throw rocks at me, but it could be a smaller project. I know that there's at some point that doesn't work financially, but is there any downsizing of this project so the impact is less in the town in one chunk? I mean, these are questions I'd like to ask the development team. And I'm sure I won't get an answer, but I figured I'd ask it anyway.
Well, right. I mean, they're good questions, and we're not barred from asking questions. So, and at some point, yes, if they scaled it down, does that lessen the impact and still allow them to, do their project and, without making it quote uneconomic, and they'd have to claim that, not us, but yeah, well, we've done it with all our 40Bs, right? If density is the overarching issue, then we work on density. This one's going to have, maybe for traffic impacts, if the only way to lessen the traffic impact is to lessen the size of the site, without putting that as a total bottleneck and congestion point that would have issues that bring on safety, where if there was an accident and the police or fire couldn't get to it because it's a total traffic jam, or there's a fire and they can't get through, or emergency vehicles, and so yeah, if all those things can't get settled in our review, then maybe at some point the recommendation is a downscale project. But at this starting point, I think all these questions that people are asking, we'll have to vet to see what information we can get to help, in my mind, rationalize that as proposed, the project can go at that 229 level.
Mr. Chairman, could
I hear a voice, but I can't.
This is Ted Barr again. I just wanted to, if I could, ask one specific question that perhaps the board could ask of the applicant and have it for the next meeting, and that is, where did the approximately $700,000 a year estimated tax payment figure come from? I asked our town administrator this question, and he told me he had in fact heard an explanation of it at some point, but he didn't want to speak for the applicant and he didn't want to elaborate on that. But I for one would love to hear how that figure was derived for a $66 million project. So perhaps the board could ask the applicant to speak to that at the next meeting.
Sure. Mhm.
So I have a question, Jared. This is kind of more to Jim specifically, but I know originally when the plans had come through, there were no elevators at all in any of the units. So to kind of bounce off what Ted was just talking about, why was the decision made to add the elevator to the one sort of call it main unit? And then logistically, like, what is the reasoning for not having elevators in the other units?
Through the chair, sure, I'd be happy to answer that. So you're correct. So when we originally proposed the project, there were no elevators. Typically in these 3-story buildings, they are built as walk-up buildings, and that's the most efficient way to build them. We had, as many of you on here know, we have had meetings with Board of Selectmen, and then we had multiple meetings with community outside of the town process. We had heard comments similar to that about elevators. And so as a compromise, we went ahead and added one to the largest building in the project. So you have to remember, right? So in all of these buildings, they all have a first floor that an elevator has nothing to do with. So if you live on a third of the project, right out of the gate, doesn't need an elevator. So we felt like the most efficient way to add that would be to add it to the largest building in the project. The 2 large U-shaped buildings are corridor buildings, right? So they have a main corridor with units that come off of the corridor on either side. Buildings 3 and 4, the smaller buildings in the back, do not have corridors at all. So you couldn't put in an elevator in those buildings because there's no common corridor to begin with. And also because of just the size of the building, the expense of putting in an elevator to serve few units is just super inefficient. But the reality is on those buildings, it's because they don't have corridors. So, you know, the only other building really that we could look at would be the other U-shaped larger building.
Yeah, I just wonder, because like, I don't know, I've lived in a lot of apartments before I moved to Bolton, like a lot, all over the place. I lived in Worcester for many, many years. And I mean, I'm young, but still like pulling groceries up 3 stories of stairs was like horrific. And real life, if I was looking for new apartments, that was specifically something I didn't look at. Like I wouldn't even consider something like that if it was a situation. So not to say that everybody's going to have my personal opinion, but I just wonder about like, have you had any kind of pushback against that in other organizations that you've built like this, where have people expressed disinterest based on the fact, or, you know, asked specifically to have first floor units or only being in a unit with an elevator just for like convenience purposes? Does that question make sense? Because, you know, I wonder, we build this huge thing and then nobody wants to live there because there's some inconvenience, right? So
absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, so as you know, we're not only developing housing here in Massachusetts, but we develop it around the country. And, you know, we build a lot of these 3-story products around the country, and they all lease up, and they all lease up at just as fast or a faster pace than in our urban projects that are, you know, maybe high rise with elevators, believe it or not. Certainly there's always going to be a certain subset of folks who don't want to walk up to the 3rd floor, but by and large, we've found it to be a non-issue. That, you know, if that's your decision, then you'll either live at a different property or you'll live on the 1st floor or the 2nd floor. We just really have never seen it, you know, be an issue. And obviously it would be in our best interest to address that if we felt like it wasn't leasable. So we would never do that, you know, to ourselves. So we felt like in this case, given, you know, that you've got a third of the project on the 1st floor just by default, and then adding an elevator to the largest building that would serve 2nd and 3rd floor, you're really not left with that many units, particularly on the 3rd floor of any of the buildings where people would have to walk up to. And we just don't feel like that's a problem. Not to say we wouldn't look at that at the other larger building, but we don't view it as an issue whatsoever.
Okay. And then just
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, just to kind of bounce off that from a handicap accessibility perspective, do you put any units in that are specifically handicap accessible, or is that something that you don't typically do? And then I'm assuming, based on codes and stuff, and I'm not well versed in the specific building codes, especially for a development like this, but I'm assuming that all the public spaces, if you will need to be handicap accessible. Is that a valid?
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam, feel free to jump in with the specifics, but these buildings all have building codes, and in Massachusetts here, we have some of the most stringent building codes in the country. So we absolutely have to adhere to all those, including the ADA compliant units. Adam, I don't know if you have handy or Mike Tulipani, what the specifics are on the number of those units, but I think what happens here is in buildings where you don't have elevators, you put them on the first floor. Otherwise, you can spread them out on multiple floors if you are in an elevator building. Is that accurate, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have our we have our group 2 units, which are the accessible units, all located on the first floor of each building.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't, anyone that wants to rent one of those units has direct access to it.
Okay.
And I will say that we have a project called Legacy Farms in Hopkinton that is very similar building style, and we did not have any 3 stories, very similar footprint.
Okay.
I think Adam was muted. I'm Rob from Market Square Architects. So yes, we'll be required to follow both federal housing guidelines as well as Massachusetts Architectural Access Board, which regulates accessibility to buildings. And the number of units is based on a percentage, and it changes based on the scale of the project. But yes, we'll have a percentage of units that are required to be accessible. And then there's a myriad of other guidelines that we'll need to follow.
Okay, thank you.
So it's safe to say that most of your projects then in Massachusetts, if they're of a 3-story size, from what you're indicating, that they wouldn't be elevator access. It's you have just stairway access.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, most of our projects across the country that are 3 stories are walk-ups. It's actually more unusual to have 3-story buildings with an elevator. Once you get to 4 stories, automatically you go to an elevator building. And to be frank, we build more these days. We build more 4- and 5-story projects than we do 3-story projects, especially here in Massachusetts, given our lack of land availability in space. So more dense projects that go up a little taller is the norm. But across the country, it's much more usual than not to have the 3-story walk-up product, especially in the markets where we have much more land, available to spread out horizontally.
Okay. All right. So Ted Barton may have stole the next person's thunder, but he did reference, we did have another letter from or email from a V. Boyle. He referenced it in the Boyle inquiry, which Ted may have summarized already. He was looking for more details about impacts on traffic, education, town services, and the impact on town resources. So I think it was clear through many of the comments so far that we crave some more information, and it will just us to see what information we can negotiate to get to help allay some of the concerns that people have. And that'll be done throughout the project as we work with the applicant. If there aren't any other, or are there any other abutters or participants on the Zoom call that we haven't spoken to that may have a comment? Otherwise, I'd like to shift over and spend maybe 15-20 minutes on, we have had comments received from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of our town boards. So if we want to take some time to just review some of those comments, that would be fine. And then we can, after we get through that, we could open it up to the applicant if he has, he or his team have any responses to what they've heard tonight, or any of the letters that they may have got to them already. And, we can schedule time for that, and then, update and figure out when's the next time for another hearing, and go from there. So Valerie, do you want to sort of summarize some of the board comments that we've received to date, and confirm that they've all been provided to the applicant?
Sure. Yes, I believe these have all been made available to the applicants. I can just try to pull some of them up for myself so I can read through them.
Yeah, I mean, I have it in front of me, like a quick summary that I, just in my notes so that I, can recall, because we have had so much documentation. But the Board of Health, I think in their letter, or, pretty much spoke to the fact that this is a Title V project. And I think that was inferring that there weren't local regulations that we have to, look out for in that. But again, I'm not a Board of Health person, so but we did get comment from them. The Conservation Commission, they've sent in their initial comment, and there was certainly identified a need for the ANRAD, need for a notice of intent, a need for additional analyses dealing with wildlife impacts, trail development. They want to ensure that there's non-invasive species, so nature-based solutions to a lot of their concerns. We had Parks and Recreation letter or email that spoke toward their interest in finding solutions to what they perceive will be a loss of recreation space, looking for a need for a playground space, looking for ways to incorporate a potential bike access to and from the facility to into town, or potentially out to other parts of town, like down by Country Cupboard, things like that. So there was that type of flavor of comments. Again, I'm not sure if that letter was fully voted on at their board, because I think there was a letter from a El Cedrone that indicated he wasn't in agreement with some of the information in Ed Sterling's letter, but we'll have to reach out to them to make sure we get their full board comment and inquiries. The police sent in a letter. It looked like, if I recall, one of the concerns, they wanted to be sure that a turnout lane, and I think that sort of goes toward some of the other comments we've had from town residents about access into that project or into that property, and then egress out, especially as you're going left toward west, that we need some type of better flow there to be sure that there aren't increased accidents at that entry point. There was concern expressed or interest expressed by the police to have in-building radio reception and transmission. So they wanted information, it seems, about that. And then the chief indicated that he was concerned that there will certainly be impact to the police resource due to the increased population. I think in that letter that he specifically addressed or referenced maybe like a 10% increase, and that's been a consistent comment by other people that with this sizable increase in town population, that is certainly going to be impacts on police, fire, EMT, and things like that. But that was in their letter. And then the other board or committee, the Public Ways Safety Committee, they sent in a letter or email where their primary concern was their request to the ZBA to be sure that we do a traffic impact and need for a peer review, which we identified earlier in the meeting that we did have Posty Witten amend their proposal, and they went out and they're going to engage Vanessa Vanace and Associate Inc., and they'll do a full peer review of the traffic on our behalf. So that aspect of the Public Way Safety Committee comment is being addressed. But they also indicated they want us to ensure that the applicant is notified Mass DOT, because the proximity to the 495 interchange and on ramps, off ramps, they want to be sure that Mass DOT has some input on what this traffic could potentially do in that area. And if I recall, they also wanted to have the applicant look at sidewalk extensions so that there's some linkage between the town center and the property so that it's easy walking access, as well as they identified their concern for bus safety considerations for school-age children. So those are some of the key items that I took out of those letters. I don't know if you called them up, Valerie, and you have any other additions that you want to make sure I didn't miss something, but to the extent that you already provided to the board, that I think to applicant, that's good, because they'll have, they'll then be able to respond to what's been provided to us at least.
Gerard, that comment about the sidewalks from the Public Ways Safety Committee did pique my interest. I think that would be very beneficial to the town. And I'd like to get the developer's input on that, but acknowledge that it would also have to be something that's done in conjunction with the current property owner. Right?
Right.
I have a quick question on for Valerie. Have we heard any feedback from Concom or the Board of Health or even the Fire Department at this point?
I've only heard the comments that Gerard had just mentioned. So, essentially what we've heard from the Board of Health is pretty typical, basically saying that, once, if the project were to move forward, they would need to comply with all Title V requirements. And, from the Concom, it might be, as Gerard was mentioning, it would be possibly kind of beneficial for the applicant to go through the NOI process or file an ANRAD while we're still, while the ZBA is still in its public hearing process, just in case that may change, plans or site planning. But I think that was a very good summary of what I've heard so far. I think it'll be important for me to try to sit down with a couple different department heads in the coming weeks and try to get a better sense of how we're viewing any impacts and how we might be able to to think about improving the project.
To Brad's point, I don't think I don't recall seeing anything from the fire department yet. Correct.
I know that the applicant has been in contact with the fire department, though I believe correct me if I'm wrong, I believe most of that conversation has occurred prior to this public hearing process. So I think, Brad, that's a good point. I think it would be beneficial for this board to see more of that correspondence or to get some more current feedback from the fire department. So I will follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Because again, we can rely on the good faith that the applicant is presenting that they're meeting with whomever they meet with or have met with. If we're going to have to act upon it, we should have it come to our board to, so it's part of our record. Any comments on the with regard to what we've received from board so far? If not, I would give the applicant some time on the schedule to either address what they've heard tonight, or if they have any responses to some of the inquiries either spoken about tonight or in the letters that we've referenced.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, a lot of discussion to try to cover. I've taken notes throughout the meeting, and certainly we have received all the letters that have been submitted through the public process, both from the boards and from members of the community. And we've read through those, and obviously we've discussed those here tonight. So by and large, I think we would like to you have the opportunity to go off and address, and review and address those comments for future meetings, and particularly on the technical side and discussions with the peer reviewer and Mr. Pesnola, especially when it comes to things like energy efficiency and related to building design, traffic, and those types of things. We're well aware those are major issues and major concerns for folks. We have had a traffic study, obviously, that's been discussed at least at a high level, that either is or will be peer reviewed, and we know that will lead to further discussions that we look forward to. So a lot of these topics, we would like to address through that peer review process and then with the board in coming meetings. But in just sort of flipping through, in the order that I at least jotted down some of these notes, back to the beginning, as Debbie Horowitz stated, we'll work with, the Board of Selectmen on the special permits that are, historically there on the site and how to address those, also with town council. There was some questions with Concom, which we're well aware of. We know that the ANRAD application is actually getting prepared and can be submitted in short order. So yes, Valerie, we agree. We're going to go ahead and submit that and start that process sooner than later. I think that makes more sense than doing that later on in the process. There was some discussion about subdivision, and Mr. Pesnola had some concerns and some questions about the office building and what will remain and how that complies. I have spoken with Condyne, who is the current owner of that site, and relayed the need for some further information on that. They had requested if there were specific questions that could be put down in writing that they could respond to. That would be helpful for them. But we do, I will say, and I know Phil Cordero from Allen & Majors on, feel free to jump in, but I will say that in designing our site plan, it wasn't done in a vacuum. It was done with a lot of discussion with Condyne about how that building, that remaining portion of the building, will be used in the future. So Phil, I don't want to bog down the meeting with those details, but if you just want to touch on the fact that, we've discussed sort of access to the back of the building and things like that, go ahead just for a minute, and then certainly we can follow up, or Condyne can follow up with more detail on the plan for that going forward.
Yeah, Jim, I'm happy to. Very, very quickly, for the benefit of the board. During the design of the site, we absolutely contemplated what the office park would look like, what the remnant building is, the access off the rear for the loading dock, and then certainly the main parking circulation. So to Mr. Pesnola's point about the remaining project on their end, there will be a penultimate set of plans that will ultimately define what that site looks like, what its conformance is with zoning. And I think all of those answers all of those questions can be answered as we move through the process with them. We needed to, of course, compartmentalize this application versus the needs of the remnant site plan. So we'll provide some answers to that as we move forward.
Thanks, Phil. And Mr. Chairman, just continuing on some of my notes here, there's a lot of discussion that goes back well before this discussion with the ZBA about access to the recreational fields. I think we addressed that in the presentation, but obviously that's an issue that remains. Although we've made a lot of progress with it, it remains unresolved in that it hasn't been finalized. That certainly is going to be a coordinated effort between ourselves as the applicant and the town of Bolton. We do have a proposed solution that's been discussed, which was discussed on the site walk and explained to continue to connect automobile access through the road that the beginning portion of the road anyway that exists there today, and then looping around back around towards the school, and just in filtering any vehicular access that way, while still allowing any pedestrian access through the current path. And that needs to be continued and further vetted, but we certainly feel like we've made a lot of progress in that on that issue since it first came up many months ago when we first proposed the project. And we'll continue to work with the appropriate folks on that. That's one. Again, oh, I'm sorry, water. So there's been a lot of questions about water usage and the ability to be able to feed a project of this scale. I think we mentioned this on the site walk that we have a consultant, Dave Formato, who I believe is on the call tonight. We are in the process of doing well testing as we speak. Dave, you don't mind just touching quickly on what we're doing? I know it's not complete yet, but so the board can have an idea of what we're undertaking, which we certainly believe will answer a lot of the questions. If you don't mind going ahead on that real quick, that'd be great.
Not a problem. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, thanks.
All right, Mr. Chairman, board members, Dave from On-Site Engineering, thanks for having me. Real quick, as you mentioned, we are currently in process of testing out the site to understand the total capacity of the bedrock wells existing and proposed. As of right now, it appears that we are on track and trending in the right direction to be able to meet per Mass DEP requirements, the necessary amount of water to serve this project. And also, I know this is a question that was brought up previously, but this water system will also be serving the remaining Condyne facilities. So the water system is going to be combined to serve both properties when we're done. There isn't going to be separate water systems out there. So it'll just be one common water system feeding both sites.
And you're looking at the potential impacts or not of butters wells as you do your analysis, because that has come to us to, there are some butters that are in particular that is concerned that, what happens if her well dries up, because of the project. So
yes, absolutely. The state actually is requiring a very extensive testing program. Typically for a public water supply, you perform a 48-hour pump test to demonstrate that you've got sufficient capacity, and you essentially monitor water levels in the wells you're testing, and then maybe a monitoring well in and around the property. For this particular site, the setup is all 3 proposed wells are being pumped for 5 days simultaneously, nonstop. The existing wells at Bolton Manor, because it's the closest, largest well supply, is being monitored to make sure that there is no hydraulic connection at that well. So, obviously, as you progress radial outward, the connections become less and less. So the state felt confident that if Bolton Manor's water supply was not impacted at all by that massive pumping that was going to be undertaken as part of this testing program, that we would have a very high level, a much greater level of confidence than you would normally get from the standard pump testing. So, and that process is underway, and the preliminary results so far look promising.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Jim, if you don't mind, while I'm on, just one mention on the Title V question and the wastewater side of things on the opposite side of the water coin. It's important to understand that the Board of Health actually was correct in referencing that there is no applicability of Title V to this project because it's over 10,000 gallons per day. So the applicant's providing their own private wastewater treatment facility, which is permitted through the state only outside of Title V. So Title V does not apply in this particular case. So it's a state permit rather than a local permit.
Thanks, Dave.
Anytime.
Mr. Chairman, so just sort of to finalize, responses, just high level here. Elevators was next on my list. We discussed that already. Rooftop solar, that we'd prefer to have that discussion through the peer review process on the technical side. Certainly something that we're open to, and I think I had mentioned previously we've been doing or have started doing on other projects, and we can see the advantages of that certainly here with the all electric. And left-hand turn only that came, or I'm sorry, right-hand turn only, kind of / traffic questions. Again, defer to the peer review process on that one, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that in more detail as we go. And then I know there were, and this is sort of more broad, we have read many of the board comments, and there's some really good suggestions in there that, and concerns about bus stop locations and sidewalk extensions and things like that. All issues that we're aware of that are, have been discussed previously, that we're more than happy to address, whichever way we can, whether it's in our power. I think, like, for example, the sidewalk extensions, that's something that we've stated in the past that we're more than open to. There are other property owners involved in that, and I don't think it's as simple as just running something straight down the road because of setbacks and utility poles and things like that. But we are looking at that, and that's something that we're happy to continue to discuss with this board. I think I'd mentioned last time regarding bus safety and bus stop location. I did have a call. This is going back a while now with the educational folks in town, and the answer was it was too early to really nail down what the bus route would be, in a couple of years from now when the project would open, because it's a contracted bus service, and there's certain requirements and certain things they will and won't do. We've set it up so that there absolutely could be a bus stop, inside the development where the mail-in kiosk is when you pull into the site. So that's absolutely something that we think is a good idea. But that one's a little bit more out of our hands. So however we feel like, collectively we can address that, we're more than willing to do so. There's other, that was just a sampling, but there's other questions and comments from the various boards, and I'm sure there'll be more, and we're certainly happy to address those more specifically going forward.
Perfect. So, well, I think, to the extent there's any letter or, when you do follow-up presentations where you formally respond, then, we'll just keep a running list. We'll tick them off as you respond. I want to acknowledge at least it's going down the right path, is that you're very cognizant of what's been presented to you in your application team from your past dealings with the town. And I can see you taking the initiative at least to, at least thoroughly, consider what people, we'll have to see if the 40B process can accommodate some of the things, but at least good faith, you're trying to address the concerns from what I'm seeing. So that, that's the spirit we have to sort of go through the process with, and that'll help us all get to the outset, to the outcome.
We totally agree. I mean, we have said from day one when we started talking with the Board of Selectmen, this being a LIP project, this is a partnership. And I understand that does come with some limitations with the process, but we have listened and provided many forums for comment, both from the town and from the public. And I'd like to think that we're listening and addressing the ones that we can, and we're not going to be able to address all of them satisfactory to everybody, and we acknowledge that. But we're we just hope to be transparent about what we can and can't do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good expectation to have for the project. So, so any comments to Jim's his comments, or otherwise? I think what we could do is we actually can think about looking at a calendar and scheduling the next hearing date.
I have one question. Beat a dead horse. Is there any possibility of getting any kind of voluntary data on impacts?
So, Mr. Reed, so I think it was mentioned, and I can't remember now. I think maybe Mr. Piznola addressed it. I think there's discussions that can be had and information that can be provided on certain portions. I'll defer to the experts on the 40B process, but understanding that sort of a comprehensive fiscal impact study is not appropriate here. We have already provided with the Board of Selectmen some data on like-kind properties and how many school children they had and what their unit mixes were and things like that. And
Can you provide that to us? I mean, I haven't seen that data. Is that something you can send to Valerie?
Yes, sir, we could. Yes, sir, we could. And that was part of a, of a public process that was, done many months ago. And it was, it was public information that was gathered on what I'll call competing properties, competing like-kind properties. So there's things like that, Mr. Reed, that certainly can be gathered and discussed.
I mean, I'm not asking you to do a comprehensive study, but I'm looking for some guidance and some data so that the town doesn't get blindsided. So, I mean, that's that, I know we have no impact on it, but it sure would be nice to know what the deal is.
Yeah.
Understood. Absolutely.
So Jim, would that type of data also have information about how you either confirmed or derived there's a potential $700,000 tax benefit to the town, so that we then in looking at those details on that, then people can sort of say, okay, at least if that's reasonable to assume that at least there's a way to calculate up to that or see how that happens. And if we think that there's other resources that are going to offset that, we at least be cognizant of what we're looking at, just rather than numbers being presented. It's like, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. So on the taxes, so the way we and certainly those are projections, right? And there are projections, but they're projections, and the way that we've done them is similar to the way we've done them on all of our projects throughout the state, and that's to look at like-kind projects. Certainly, if you're in a place like a Boston or a Waltham where there is a lot of similar type large-scale multifamily projects, it's a little bit easier. You can look at the size of the project, the rent, the location, and say, yeah, whatever they're paying for taxes is probably about what we're going to pay for taxes. It's not quite as easy in a town like Bolton, right, where there's nothing of this like kind. So you start looking to similar type properties and similar type towns in the area, and you have to adjust obviously for their tax rates because everybody's tax rate is different. But it'll give you a pretty good indication of what competing properties are paying per unit. And I certainly understand that looking at that number and looking at it on a per unit basis is a lot lower than looking at a single family home, but obviously, for valid reasons, right? They're a fraction of the size of the average single family home in Bolton. They don't have land, and so on and so forth. So it's really not an apples to apples comparison, but we do our analysis. We also hire, third party, folks to do, private analysis for us that support that when it's appropriate. But it's a projection, and it's a projection based on, like-kind properties in a triangulation as best we can.
Okay. Sure. So yeah, if you can get us if that's some of that detail, I mean, what was presented to the selectmen again, because we're sort of stepping into this as the deciding board. So unless Valerie already has that information and she can forward it to us, but if she doesn't, then I'd say, yeah, if you could submit it, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're happy to submit it. It was posted at some point. Sorry, Valerie, on the town. I don't know if you could probably answer if it still is.
If which part?
There was a presentation that we did with the Board of Selectmen, I believe the first one. At some point in time, it was posted on the town website. I don't know if it still lives there or not, but we can certainly resubmit that.
Yeah, I think it's cleaner if things are resubmitted to this board. Would just be my preference, because these are two separate processes, and if we will need to provide it to the board and review at a public hearing. So yeah, if there's any other information that was shared with the Board of Selectmen, while we were figuring out the lit process, that would be great to have resubmitted so that we can include it here.
Happy to do that. Certainly, we can either resubmit the full presentation to you or pull out the pertinent pieces, because that had a plan that's changed over time. It was some of you may or may not know that we had originally proposed 278 units, and through the course of discussion, both internally and with the Board of Selectmen and others, we had whittled that down to where we stand today. So some components of that presentation are sort of old and non-relevant, and some could be helpful. So, Valerie will work with you to get you the information that makes the most sense.
Perfect, that'd be helpful. And then we're dealing with what's in front of us, and not like we don't have to do our own, review of other boards, what they've given, what they don't have. I mean, we can deal with you right up front with whatever we have. So that'll be best way.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So if we look at a month, sort of a month out, I mean, because we're now into next 2 weeks will be holidays and things like that. Then we have the beginning of the new year. We're going to have probably our peer review comments back from Judith Nitch, not Judith, the Nitch Engineering by, Horsley Witten, not too long from now, I would think. So middle of January or third week of January, does that work with the applicant as far as next hearing or board members? Anyone have a preference of time? Do you have a calendar, Valerie, you can look at?
Yes, I believe we had set our next public hearing with the other 40B at Mallard Lane for January 11th.
11th, right.
So, that week.
That may be a tough
looks
two 40B meetings on the same week. But I don't know, at least for me, but the other members, but maybe if we could schedule it the following week.
What time is that meeting out on the 11th?
6:30.
the one we set for, a little bit earlier. It was 6 or 6:30. I can't recall.
6:30 if I recall. We pushed it up. I don't know if it was 6, but it's earlier than this as a starting point. But given the size of this project and where we are, the full 2 hours seems to take a good meeting allotment time. So the other 40B, I mean, we have some work on that one as well. Even if it only took an hour, it turns into a long meeting, and I don't want to give this one short shrift and miss or speed through things just because we only have an hour to look at it.
Yeah, I'd suggest the following week.
Mhm.
I would say that's good, yeah.
Okay. So
The 17th is a holiday, so perhaps Tuesday, the 18th.
Yeah, that's better.
does that work for me? So is there a preference to start a little earlier versus 6:30? Does that work for people, or does that work for the applicant and his team?
6:30 is great for me.
Mhm.
That works fine for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can work that, yeah.
Okay. Does that work with you, Joe?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Because I do believe your resource is going to be very valuable throughout the process. One, for the town residents to know we have a resource looking out, helping us on our behalf, but also you can dialogue with the applicant as necessary on points of, not contention, but points that we're not sure as a board what, is within the parameters of the 40B, in the lip. So that'd be great. All right, so we have a motion to continue the hearing until January 18th at 6:30 p.m.
I'll motion to continue to January, what day was it? Sorry.
18th.
18th at 6:30 p.m.
Perfect.
Second,
Okay.
And
call.
those in favor, Brian Holmes,
Aye.
Brad Reed,
aye.
Gerard Ahern,
Yes.
Andy Kishitz. Oh, there he is.
He hasn't left us. Is he on mute?
Just move, I'll keep going. And Gabriela Mano.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So we all said, or do we need Andy to opine? Oh, he's on mute, it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as he's present and listening, it's okay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, thanks, folks, and everyone have a great holiday season, and be safe, and we'll look forward to reconnecting in January.
Thank you, Mr. and members of the board. Appreciate your time.
Likewise. Valerie, do we have any, do we have to, any minutes reviews or anything, or can we adjourn?
No, I think this was all we had on the agenda.
Okay.
I just have one comment before we adjourn.
Hello?
Ted suggested that we consider a lesser number of units that would still meet the needs of the state for the 40B. Is there an action item to determine what that lesser number is?
Well, just for the processes, as we go through the 40B review of all the information comes in, if some of these issues that people are looking at, whether it be traffic or whether it be, use of the land, wetland, all those impacts, if we find that we can't come to a good solution on those, then yes, the density then can factor in. But at this point, we have to look at the project as it's been presented and sort of come up with, if we can't permit it within those parameters, then yes, density always is something we can look at, but it's not. We look at the outset. So,
but is there some?
But we sort of closed. I don't want to. We sort of closed that sort of the hearing portion. I closed it, but continued it to the next hearing. So I don't want to take it because the other butters and other people left the hearing. So
okay.
Document that you're concerned to Valerie, and then we'll bring it up for the next hearing.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat further with you about that if you want.
Yeah. Okay. Not trying to cut you off, Mr. Jordan, but it's just the process. We've already sort of continued to the next hearing.
No problem. Good night.
Okay, thank you. But appreciate your participation. All right, so motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Thanks, Brad.
Those in favor, Brian Holmes,
Yes.
Brad Reed,
Yes.
Gerard Ahern,
Yes.
Gabriela Mano,
Yes.
Elizabeth Hutchins,
Yes.
and Andy Kishitz. All right.
All right, that's good enough. Good for government.
Good night.
I appreciate everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Have a great holiday, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah.
You too.
Get
Okay,
your
bye-bye.
weekend, Brian.
Yeah, it's in.
Mine's-
Tarp's not in, but the frame is up. Tarp will go in on Friday.
My tarp went in yesterday, and it's about 95% full.
Yeah, I see we're getting weather on Saturday, so I'll put it in Friday and start filling it then.
Yeah. All right.
All right, we'll see you.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Folks.
Bye.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thank
Ted.
you.